Welcome to week 3, and this week we will be talking about understanding work teams. In the last few weeks or couple weeks, we've talked about groups, but now we're moving into teams. And work teams have become very commonplace, but I want you to realize that work teams are not always the solution to organizational problems. The manager, that's either you or hopefully in the future, really need to understand how and when to utilize teams properly. And so I think the first question to ask ourselves is, why have teams become so popular? Well, research evidence has suggested that teams typically outperform individuals when the task being done requires multiple skills, judgment, and experience. As organizations have reacted to external pressures to restructure themselves to compete more effectively and efficiently, they've turned to teams more and more often. We know that there's better utilization of your employees' talents, so you can reach out and involve many in a process instead of just that individual. We also know with teams they're more flexible and they're responsive to changing events. So the use of teams has really increased managerial flexibility. Additionally, teams are a means for effectively democratizing organizations where everyone has a voice and increasing employee motivation. So again, we've been talking the first couple of weeks about groups, and now we're moving into teams. So we're going to look at work group versus work teams. So we know with a work group, a group is defined as two or more individuals interacting and interdependent to come together to achieve a particular objective. A work group is a group that interacts primarily to share information and to make decisions to help each member perform within his or her area of responsibility. Now, work groups have no need to engage in a collective work or joint efforts, so no positive synergy is created. And if you'll notice, I put the definition of synergy up in your introduction for this week of how working together produces better results. Now, work teams, in contrast to work teams or work groups, work teams create positive synergy through coordinated efforts. Their individual efforts result in a level of performance that's greater than the sum of the individual inputs. The use of work team creates the potential for organizations to generate greater outputs with no increase in their inputs. So they can take the resources, their people that they already have, and use those people to create more input for their company. The synergy, though, is not always guaranteed, so we know that effective teams have certain characteristics, and we'll discuss that. Managers must ensure those common characteristics to achieve their desired synergy. So let's look at comparing work groups and work teams. So if we look at it, on the left is work groups, on the right work teams. So if you look at the goal for that, with work groups is to share information. But if we look at work teams, their goal is collective performance. Also, if we look at synergy, work groups, it's neutral, sometimes negative, but the synergy within work teams is positive. If we look at accountability with work groups, it's individual. They're out there for themselves and they're only taking care of themselves. While in work teams, there still might be some individual accountability, but there's also mutual because you are working on a team, therefore working with others to produce the synergy and to move towards that goal. So if we look at skills within work groups, they're random, they're varied. But if we look at the skills within a work team, they're complementary. We are putting people together on a team, and we'll talk about that, to make sure that we can be the most effective team that we need. So 4 types of teams. These are the 4 types of teams that are out there in a business. We have problem-solving teams, we have self-managed teams, cross-functional teams, and virtual teams. So let's spend a few minutes talking about problem-solving teams. When we look at problem-solving teams, these are the teams in which members share ideas or offer suggestions on how work processes and methods can be improved, although they rarely have the authority to implement any of their suggested actions. So they're problem-solving teams that may have been set up in a company, but they're not really given any authority. They're just out there trying to solve a problem, and they're really not at the process of where they can move beyond that. And that's where self-managed work teams come in. These are autonomous teams, and they were created to overcome some of the shortcomings of problem-solving teams. And so if we look at self-managed work teams, they're typically 10 to 15 employees, and they perform highly related or interdependent jobs. These teams take on many of the responsibilities of their former supervisors, such as planning, scheduling of work, assigning tasks to members, collective control over the pace of the work, making operating decisions. They can take actions on problems, and they can work with suppliers. They can also work with customers. They're fully self-managed work teams. They can even select their members, and they can have their members evaluate each other's performance. In these situations, really your supervisors become less important, and in some cases, the supervisors may even be eliminated. So what research has showed us and what it's indicated is the effectiveness of self-managed teams is situationally dependent. While most of the individuals in these teams do report higher levels of job satisfaction, there are variables such as culture, team makeup, reward structures that can make self-managed work teams less attractive. So let's move on and talk about cross-functional teams. These are teams that are made up of employees from about the same hierarchy level, but from different work areas. So they're from diverse areas within and between the organization, but they come together to accomplish a specific task. And this type of team is an effective means of allowing people from diverse areas of the organization to exchange information. With this, you can develop new ideas, you can solve problems, you can also coordinate complex projects. Cross-functional teams are somewhat difficult to manage because they may take significant time before they become effective. And when we talk about a cross-functional team, one example of that is a task force or a task team. I'm actually a part of that right now, and we are working with the university. We've purchased a new or absorbed a new university in Memphis, so trying to onboard them. So we need someone from financial aid, from the registrar's office, from admissions, from billing, from IT. So we are a task force or a task team that has been put together to try to onboard and get new students enrolled and working with them. Another example maybe that you've been a part of is a committee. It's composed of members from different departments. That is considered a cross-functional team as well. Virtual teams is the last, and I'm not going to talk much about it because we're going to hit on that the last couple of weeks of class. But it's unlike the first three types of teams. Virtual teams don't meet face-to-face, and we know that. They use a computer, and they use the technology from that to tie themselves together. And they're physically dispersed members all over the globe, it could be. So the primary factors with this, and there are three, to differentiate virtual teams from face-to-face teams. The differences are the absence of paraverbal, and when I'm talking about paraverbal, I mean voice inflection or voice volume. You also don't have the nonverbal cues that are out there. And when I talk about nonverbal cues, it's movement, facial expression, hand gestures, or other body language. There's also very limited social context. There's also the ability to overcome time and space constraints. So virtual teams often suffer from less social rapport, less direct interaction among its members, and they tend to be more task-oriented and exchange less social, emotional information.